When you write a literature review, you are not writing a long summary of studies. You are building an argument. That argument is built in layers. First through themes, then through paragraphs inside those themes. Each paragraph has one job. When someone struggles with literature reviews, it is almost never because they cannot write sentences. It is because they do not know what decisions to make before they write. A literature review is built in stages, and the order matters. You do not write first. You decide first. You decide what your themes are. Then inside each theme, you decide what job each paragraph needs to do. Writing comes last. In when people try to write before making those decisions, the work feels confusing, repetitive, and overwhelming even when they understand the research. When people try to write before making those decisions, the work feels confusing, repetitive, and overwhelming even when they understand the research. Here is the process you should always have in your head as you work. First, you read studies and sort them into themes based on repeated ideas. Then you choose one theme to work on at a time. Inside that theme, you decide what paragraph jobs are needed. Only after that do you draft topic sentences for each paragraph. Once the topic sentences are in place, you add studies and relationship language. Then you write a meaning or consequence sentence to close each paragraph. Finally, you revise using structural checks. To understand how this works, let's define what a theme is. A theme is the organizing idea for a section of your literature review. It answers the question, what are we talking about in this part of the review? A theme is not a paragraph. A theme is a container that holds multiple paragraphs. Themes come from repetition. As you read across studies, you notice the same idea, issue, or focus appearing again and again. That repeated idea becomes a theme. If you cannot identify a theme without resorting to author names, you do not yet have a theme. You have a list. A theme should sound like an idea, not a citation trail. For example, faculty interactions and belonging is a theme. Smith and Jones on belonging is not. Theme size matters. If a theme can only support one paragraph, it is usually too narrow or underdeveloped. If a theme feels like it contains many different ideas competing inside it, it is too large and needs to be split. Most theme sections in a literature review are 2 to 4 paragraphs long. That is normal. One paragraph cannot do everything a theme needs to do. It also helps to know what a finished theme section usually looks like before you write anything. Most theme sections include one paragraph that establishes the main pattern in the literature, followed by 1 or 2 paragraphs that add complexity, such as disagreement, methodological limits, or what is missing. Sometimes a theme ends with a gap paragraph that prepares the reader to move on. Knowing this upfront prevents you from either stopping too early or writing far too much. Now let's talk about what you are doing when you read, because this is where many students feel unsure. When you read for a literature review, you are not reading to memorize or summarize. You are reading to sort. From every article, you should consistently pull the same pieces of information. You want the study's main claim related to your topic. You want the key finding or evidence connected to that claim. You want the angle the study takes, such as outcomes, experiences, processes, supports, or barriers. And you want to notice what the study does not capture or leaves uncertain. It is very common for a study to seem like it could fit under more than one theme. That is not a mistake. That is a decision. You place the study where it does the most work for the paragraph's main idea. A study does not need to appear everywhere it could possibly fit. Once you have themes, the next step is deciding paragraph jobs inside each theme. You do this by repeatedly asking one question. What does my reader need next to understand this theme clearly? The answer determines the paragraph job. If studies agree and point to a clear pattern, you write a synthesis paragraph. If studies disagree, you write a debate or contrast paragraph. If studies largely agree but rely on the same narrow methods, you write a methods pattern paragraph. If something is consistently missing across studies, you write a gap paragraph. The theme stays the same. The paragraph job changes. It also matters that paragraph jobs usually appear in a predictable order. In most cases, Synthesis comes first, because the reader needs to understand the pattern before they can understand disagreement or limitation. Debate and methods paragraphs usually come after synthesis, because they complicate what was just established. Gap paragraphs usually come last within a theme, because they name what still cannot be explained after everything else has been shown. Now we will walk through each paragraph type in the same way, every time, without skipping steps. A background or context paragraph is used at the beginning of a literature review or at the beginning of a major theme section. Its job is to orient the reader. It explains what this area of research is and why it matters. It does not argue a gap and it does not position your study. Before you write a background paragraph, you should be able to explain the topic in broad terms without talking about what is missing. If you cannot do that yet, do not write. Go back to reading. Background paragraphs are built from breadth and usually include about 3 to 6 studies. When you read for a background paragraph, you are scanning introductions and framing sections. You are looking for how researchers describe importance, scope, and relevance. When you write a background paragraph, each sentence has a clear role. The first sentence names the topic and explains why it matters. The next sentence shows that this topic has been studied and recognized by multiple researchers. The next sentence may further describe how the field understands the topic, often using grouped citations. The final sentence gently narrows toward the focus of the review, or the next section. The paragraph is finished when the reader feels oriented. If you begin discussing absence or limitation, you have gone too far. A synthesis paragraph shows a pattern across studies about one idea and explains what that pattern means. This is the most common paragraph type and the one students struggle with most. Before you write a synthesis paragraph, you must be able to state the idea of the paragraph in one clear sentence without naming any authors. If you cannot do that, you are not ready to write. Synthesis paragraphs usually include about 2 to 4 studies. When you read for synthesis, you are scanning for repeated ideas, not matching methods. A simple test is whether you can complete the sentence across studies. Research suggests that, with one idea. When you write a synthesis paragraph, every sentence has a job. The first sentence names the idea. The second sentence introduces evidence from one study. The third sentence adds another study and uses relationship language like similarly, however, in contrast, building on this, or extending this. If you add another study, it must deepen the same idea, not introduce a new one. The final sentence explains what the studies mean together. Without that meaning sentence, the paragraph is incomplete. If most sentences start with author names, you are summarizing. If they start with ideas and relationships, you are synthesizing. A debate or contrast paragraph shows that the literature does not fully agree. Its job is to map a specific disagreement and explain what that disagreement leaves unresolved. Before you write a debate paragraph, you should be able to state the disagreement in one sentence. If you cannot clearly name what researchers disagree about, do not write yet. Debate paragraphs usually include about 3 to 5 studies total. When you read for debate, you are looking for studies answering the same question but reaching different conclusions. When you write a debate paragraph, sentence roles matter. The first sentence names the disagreement. The next 1 or 2 sentences explain one position using evidence. The next 1 or 2 sentences explain the contrasting position using evidence. You may include a sentence that explains context or nuance. The final sentence explains what remains unclear because of the disagreement. Without that consequence sentence, the paragraph is not finished. A methods pattern paragraph explains how research design shapes what the field knows and does not know. Before you write a methods paragraph, you should be able to identify a repeated methodological choice across studies. These paragraphs usually include about 4 to 8 studies. When you read for them, you scan methods sections for repetition in design, sample, measures, setting, or time frame. When you write a methods paragraph, sentence roles are again clear. The first sentence names the dominant methodological pattern. The next sentence explains what that pattern helps researchers understand well. The next sentence explains what it makes difficult to see. The final sentence explains why that limitation matters for understanding the theme. Listing methods without explaining consequences is not enough. A gap paragraph names what the literature cannot yet explain. A gap is not just what is missing. A gap is what remains unclear because something is missing. Before you write a gap paragraph, you should be able to point to multiple places in the literature where the same absence appears. When you write a gap paragraph, sentence roles matter. The first sentence summarizes what the literature has established. The next sentence names what is missing. The final sentence explains the consequence, what the field still cannot explain because that piece is missing. If you cannot clearly state the consequence, you do not yet have a usable gap. A transition to study paragraph comes last. It restates the gap, explains why it matters, and states what your study will examine. It introduces no new literature. Transitions between paragraphs are structural. The last sentence of one paragraph should prepare the reader for the job of the next paragraph. A synthesis paragraph often ends by signaling complexity, which opens the door to debate or methods. A methods paragraph often ends by signaling limitation, which opens the door to a gap. When transitions work, the literature review feels guided rather than disjointed. Most theme sections begin with synthesis. Then you add the paragraph job the literature requires next. Some themes include 2 synthesis paragraphs if there are 2 distinct patterns, but each paragraph still carries one idea and ends with meaning. To prevent overwriting, use stop rules. Stop adding studies when new studies only repeat the same idea. Stop a paragraph when introducing a new idea would require a new topic sentence. Stop a theme when the reader understands the pattern and its limits. If you ever feel completely stuck, stop drafting. Write only theme names. Then write only paragraph job labels. Then write only topic sentences. Do not add evidence yet. Once the skeleton makes sense, return to adding sources. Finally, revise structurally. Read only the first sentence of each paragraph, then only the last sentence of each paragraph. Ask whether the first sentence names the idea, and whether the last sentence explains meaning or consequence. If a paragraph cannot be labeled with a job, it is doing too much and needs to be split. Nothing in this process is accidental. Literature reviews are built deliberately, one decision at a time.